this line of Shakespeare's "Out, out, brief candle." He would have said, well, of course I have a candle on my birthday cake and I can blow it out. He could not have seen it as a metaphor for death. How could he? He was only 3 years old. Yet it's only by realizing the power of those words reside not in the literal image of the candle, but in the fact there is a parallel between the extinction of the candle and the extinction of life. So connections then enable you to see a meaning in objects around you and people, to understand what is happening to you and what you're experiencing, and to see one thing in terms of something else, to be able to think symbolically. I'd like to suggest to you, therefore, that the mind is not some vague alternative to the squalor of the real brain. It is the biological basis of the mind, as the personalization of the brain through these unique, ever-changing dynamic connections between neurons that are driven in turn by your and your alone unique experiences. And that's why you have a unique brain, because you are constantly interacting the world. So you start off in this one-way street. How sweet, how fast, how cold, how bright. But gradually, as you are bombarded with all this information coming in, so slowly associations will form that reflect that experience, so that as you get older, as things come in now, you will evaluate them in terms of what is there already. So the one-way street has become a two-way street. And it's this wonderful dialogue with the outside world and your brain that makes you the person you are and enables you to evolve as a person as you go through life. I love this picture. Some people think this is what Oxford still looks like. Not the case. But everyone here is doing their own thing. Every person in this picture has unique coordinate in space and time, unique trajectory of a beginning, a middle, and an end to their lives, where there is a causal link. One thing leads to something else, leads to something else, and this is what we call, do we not, a life story. And in your life story, let's say you've passed an exam, you can't unpass that exam. It may be you don't make the most of your education afterwards, it might be that you fail other exams, it doesn't matter. No one can take away from you that you've passed an exam. And that has therefore had consequences within your life that has contributed to your identity, to making you the person you are. And all these events that are linked, however indirectly, in whatever ramifications, these events are leaving their mark permanently on your brain cell connections. You have up to 100,000 connections onto any one brain cell. So this then is the mind, and I hope I've convinced you that it's influenced massively by its interaction with the environment. Now, if that is the case, and this is my second conclusion, then the environment of the 21st century is unprecedented in changing how that mind is going to work, how we're going to think and feel. So let's have a look at what will happen. What will happen to the next generation of so-called digital natives? Well, to show you that there is, of course, in case you needed convincing, an important issue here. This is one of many studies currently coming about, looking at the amount of time young people spend in front of a screen. And this is one study showing here between 13 and 17 in the United States in 2010, such a number of children, over half, were spending 30+ hours a week in front of a screen. And this is in recreational use. It's not doing homework, it's not doing assignments at school. This is 30+ hours a week, which is what, 5 hours a day? Plus, sometimes a lot more, therefore, working with digital media as opposed to doing anything else. So I think that most neuroscientists won't automatically say it's good or bad, but everyone will say it is a given that the brain will change. How can it not change if its evolutionary mandate is to adapt to an environment? And if for 5 hours a day you are in a new type of environment, then you're going to have a new type of way of thinking and seeing the world. What we need to do is to work out what that will be. Just to show that I'm not a complete Luddite, I'm a complete pessimist, let me suggest this book to you by Stephen Johnson, and I think the title speaks for itself. What he's written here is all the benefits of screen technologies. For example, improved sensory motor coordination, and something in particular that's surely desirable, a rise in IQ. And he argues very persuasively that there's been a rise in IQ scores in different societies in the West over the last few decades, and this could be due to the rehearsal of computer games, because computer games are very similar to IQ tests in the kind of talents you need. You need very fast mental agility, you need to see connections, you have to get to a fixed answer within a certain period of time. So if you are rehearsing and practicing computer games, then when you're asked to do an IQ test, you will probably be better at it, because bear in mind your brain rehearses, using it or losing it. You'll be better than someone who's never done these things. Surely that's good. Well, of course it's good. But again, he argues, just because we've seen an increase in agility with IQ tests, this has not been accompanied by an increase in insight into the economic problems of the world or the Middle East crisis. So just because you can process information quickly doesn't mean to say that you automatically have a better understanding of it. We need to distinguish between information and knowledge. The two are not the same thing. This does not mean that information is a bad thing, information processing is a bad thing, but we do need to keep it distinct from understanding and knowledge. And surely in human beings we need both. So let's look at different aspects of this screen environment to see what might be good, what might be bad, what we could try and harness if we're to shape the best environment possible for your children and your grandchildren. The issue with screen technologies, and people often forget this, is rather like with climate change, if you like. It breaks down into lots of different questions. And one is the issue of social networking sites. So let's think a little bit about social networking sites. When people communicate with each other face to face, surprisingly, words only have 10% of the total impact. Eye contact is vitally important. We all know how frightening it is to talk to someone who is not looking you in the eye at all. Or conversely, someone who stares at you continuously and doesn't let their eyes go to one side or the other. Eye contact, along with body language, therefore, not surprisingly, has a huge impact. How we interpret someone crossing their arms, how we interpret them gulping, how we interpret them turning away slightly, opening their body, and so on. All these things are subtly registered by us as giving clues as to what someone is feeling, enabling us to empathize. Similarly, voice. You don't have to speak a language to know if someone is angry or if they're happy. The tone of their voice, the rate at which they're speaking, the volume they're using, all this is very important in conveying emotions and accounts for 35% of impact. Now already we are using up all our percentages. No one has measured pheromones. These are the sneaky chemicals that intuitively give you a feeling of liking or disliking someone, or indeed, perhaps the most powerful form of communication of all, physical contact. My own father died in February 2011, and I'm sure many people hearing me speak now will have had similarly very sad scenarios where you feel completely in pieces, and yet no one can ever overestimate the power of a hug, the power of giving someone a cuddle if they're feeling very unhappy. But it's something that speaks much more than words do, but at the same time, you have to be very careful where you touch someone, when you touch them, who you touch, and the context in which you're doing it. And yet, none of these are available on Facebook. On Facebook and other social networking sites, one is left just to merely exchange words. None of the opportunities and the skills that we have for practicing empathy are possible. It is not available. So is it surprising, therefore, that we're seeing a decline in empathy? Now, in this particular study, which was with 1,400 college students over the last 30 years, they've shown in the last 10 years in particular, there has been a sharp decline in empathy. Someone could say, well, this is merely a correlation. This is merely one trend, and the rise of the digital native is another trend. And that is true, rather like people in the early 1950s said, look, there's people dying of lung cancer, and there's people who've increased in their smoking habits. It took a long time for the epidemiologists to come and actually prove in a convincing way that there was a causal link, that the smoking was causing the cancer. Similarly here, we await epidemiology, and I would like to see this happen, whereby someone can see to what extent this societal trend of being in the digital world so much can actually impact on empathy. My own view is that it would be hard to think how it couldn't possibly be a factor in some way. Another issue with empathy and the screen technologies is to look at people who are acknowledged as having problems with empathy. These are people with autistic spectrum disorders where what you see is what you get, where on the whole they will interpret someone's behavior just in terms of their actions. They find it very hard to actually pick up on voice tone and body language, and all the other skills we just saw weren't available on social networking sites. Is it surprising, therefore, that people who have autism are actually very comfortable? In fact, they prefer to be in the digital world. And I'd like to suggest to you it's because when we all engage in the cyber world, we are all effectively autistic. That is to say, we're not using those skills we've learnt of interpersonal communication. We're merely judging someone in 2 dimensions on a screen by the movements, the behaviours that they are generating. So could we see, therefore, another reason for thinking about this reduction in empathy as being linked to screen technologies? And if so, how does that impact on the kind of person that you are? What kind of identity might you have? If you are constantly defining yourself as someone who is constantly in touch with other people, who is defining themselves in terms of the number of hits or the amount of recognition they get from other people continuously online, where do you end and the other people begin? How do you see yourself as an independent entity if you're constantly involved tweeting and blogging and in social networking sites without necessarily having time to be distant from those other people? If we just think about the history of blogging, I think this is very telling. 1999, I just have to tell someone about this thing my cat did today. 2004, oh my God, cat pictures from Flickr. YouTube in 2005, moving cat pictures, and then Twitter in 2007, and this has really, of course, taken off. 1 p.m. my cat just sneezed, 1:02, cat sneezed again, 1:04, cat hasn't sneezed recently, getting worried. It does really raise the issue of who cares. Why do people feel it's important to tell other people what they had for breakfast, what they're doing at that very moment? And I feel there's 2 issues here. One is if you are so busy reading out to other people, you're not really enjoying the moment for yourself. And also, if you're doing that, you're not doing other things, and it's perhaps defining you as someone who just lives for the eyes of others. I remember seeing a BBC clip of 2 girls on a Hollywood film set sitting inside the car from the old film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And they said to these girls who are in their teenage years, how do you feel sitting inside Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? And the first thing they said was, it's Facebook worthy. Not that they were enjoying it, or they were disappointed by it, or they were nostalgic. No, Facebook worthy. The first way of describing something was in terms of how it would look, how you would look as a brand on your Facebook page, not in how you see yourself. And so my own fear is that people that are like this are perhaps in some kind of existential crisis. It reminds me very much of a little child. Look at me, mummy, I'm putting on one sock. Look at me, I'm putting on another sock, because if you don't look at me, how do I know I exist? So, might have therefore the effects of social networking, reduced empathy, and a less robust notion of identity. What about gaming? Well, this is obviously big business at the moment, and look at these 2 little boys. They're very busy playing a game, ostensibly with each other, but they're not really communicating with each other. They are playing with a screen, and we should ask ourselves, why is it that the screen, which is only 2 dimensions, as opposed to the 3-dimensional real world, which only accesses sound and vision, and not all 5 senses, why is this so attractive compared to real life? And presumably, it's because the screen is brighter and faster and louder than the real world is, and this interaction is therefore more exciting. Now, fitting in with that idea is another trend that we need to look at with greater depth, with more epidemiology, is the issue that this raises regarding attention spans. And you may not recognize the drug methylphenidate, but you may recognize the brand name Ritalin, which in the West is given for attentional problems. I gather that in Russia, it's illegal, it is banned. However, you can see that in the Western countries, that the prescriptions for this drug, which is a dopamine-based, amphetamine-based drug, you can see how they are escalating hugely. Now, could it be that doctors are prescribing more liberally? Or could it be the condition of attentional problems is being more medicalized, recognized as a medical condition? Or could it just be, and this is not mutually exclusive,